Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you'd like to join the community debate, then go to nathanoakley.com and check out the Flat Earth Debate forum. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the shape of the Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show. And one last time, if you're new to the channel, or you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now, we are joined by 10th Man, the Adam Meakin, Spurs Chemo, Ranty Flat Earth, Flatzoid, and did I say Arwin already? Arwin, how are you all doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Afternoon, everyone.
Just been joined by Chocolate Saiyan as well. Very good to have you all.
Good afternoon.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon.
Chocolate.
I was saying good afternoon. I was on mute. Sorry. Hello, afternoon. Good afternoon.
No worries.
Good morning.
Before we even get into housekeeping, in the pre-show we were being quizzed about why there's a force of down and why some people think there's a force of down that needs accounting for in the face of the Globeheads' biggest defeat to date, or probably in the last 12 months, with Georgie Musa explaining that gravity is not a force and it's a bending of a conceptual pseudo-medium known as space-time. There is no force. So the Globeheads essentially need a force. It's often the answer to many an argument. Gravity, this force that does things. Well, it's not a force. So they who require a force no longer have one. And we who do not require a force of a relative direction suddenly seem to be saying we need one and we need to account for one when we don't bloody need one, and there isn't a necessity in any way, shape or form to conjure this arbitrary force of down. So I don't mind carrying on with that discussion because it's obviously hot in the minds of the people on the panel, and forego housekeeping today just so we can carry on that conversation if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, Bob's here now in the chat. So yeah. So, I mean, I just want to show Bob something and Globebusters team. I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see how I do this. Can you share my screen, please, Nathan?
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, Bob, there was discussion about an experiment or a test that you showed yesterday. So what happened is the Ball Earthers, myself, people were looking for the source of that video, because I was saying, well, if this is in a vacuum and things are falling at different rates, this obviously shows that this force of gravity is not what they tell us. So they were scrambling, they were panicking, they were saying, oh, this just cannot be, this is not the case. Has Bob researched? Have you researched this? And so they found the website of the guy, and let's have a look here. Try to find it where it says. Okay, so it's got here, Bob. I don't know if you can see. So it's got here on June 21st. The experiment, the capsule was dropped. It fell into a vacuum, which is what you said. It says, but the capsule was in normal pressure. So, I mean, I don't know what that means to you, if it's the same as being in an actual vacuum.
Yeah. Nope. It's slightly different, isn't it?
Slightly different, yeah. So but either way, the point is that force that they speak about, it hasn't been demonstrated scientifically or with science. But I just wanted to show Bob this, so just to, I don't know if you could correct it or whatever, just mention it in the next show or something about it's not actually in a vacuum, because I thought this was great evidence or proof of this force that they call gravity to be non-existent. Anthony, what do you want to say?
It creates a baffle. So when the capsule drops, I mean, shout outs to whoever it was that spotted this, but when that capsule drops, what that does is do you remember when the helium balloon was demonstrated in that little SUV, that Chrysler Voyager or whatever it was, and he drove the car forward at harsh acceleration, and instead of the balloon going backwards the way you'd expect, it went forwards. Well, the explanation for that is the air that's inside the car is rushing to the back of the car like a fluid, and it's pushing the balloon forward because the air's running backwards. It's going to be the same thing inside this capsule. All the air is going to rush up towards the top part of the capsule, but then that's going to create a baffle or a buffer that's going to be pushing down on the weights. Now, when you look at the weights, if you look at the relative densities of all them weights, the first one is the lightest on the far left, and the final two are the heaviest. They've got more mass, but
Hold on.
density
Spurs,
is mass over volume.
Hold on a second, Spurs. Can you put the relevant thing that he's talking about on screen by chance?
Yeah, just get the columns.
The actual video.
Whatever you've got
Just
to back
get
what
it where
he's
the
talking
columns
about.
are.
What? Where the things fall?
That'll do. So the first one, lithium, right? Lithium is the least dense of all of them, and then it goes gradually more dense as you get across the top, and then you end up with iron and lead in the far two. The problem is, because density is relative, right? Then you've got mass over volume. So you've got more volume on the lithium because it's got less mass. So to make it the same, you've got to compensate by putting more volume because the mass is less. But if you look at on screen now, you've got lead on the far right-hand side, and it's moved. It's just up to like nearly 5. You can see the size of that, and you can see that lead as the heaviest, that's actually a bigger piece than the iron that's next to it, which is less big, and it's also less mass. So you've got the iron chunk, mass over volume, which is the volume is smaller than the lead. It should be bigger. So you can tell by looking at the iron relative to the lead that the iron's too small or the lead's too big. Now, why it's moving is it's a different point. But my point is that these are all of equal density because the mass and volumes are different. But the volume's important when you've got air inside the chamber, because the volume and the air they have a proportionate relationship with each other. So you've got two different sizes and two different volumes, two different mass sizes and two different volumes. But these are all meant to be really, depends on what they're trying to show, but they should really all be the same volume, the same relative density, because they need to adjust the volumes and the masses accordingly to make them all the same. And they've clearly not done it because lead and iron are not of a proportionate size to what they should be, given their mass.
So we've got actually air in that cylinder then.
Well, according to the article, it's saying. But I was asking. I mean, again, if you have air inside a vacuum, what are the results of that? Where does that air?
It kind of negates it, doesn't it? Because it brings into play, as Tony is saying, that the volume, because the volume then affects how it interacts with the air in the tube and therefore the falling rate. If it was a vacuum, that's why I thought it was quite a good experiment. If it was a vacuum inside, then the relative volume of it was kind of irrelevant in terms of measuring if there was any downward acceleration, because it was just mass related as opposed to the medium. But if there's air in there, it just makes it kind of irrelevant, because so much else comes into play then. If you look at the different sizes of the things, some of them are flat discs, which are going to distribute that mass differently than the smaller, more or the larger like rod-like ones. It's
yeah, and don't forget the effect on the air as well, because the air is dropping or the capsule is dropping. That's going to push all the heavier air, the densities of the air inside that capsule to the top, because it's an accelerating reference frame now. And that is going to create a baffle effect at the top. So that's going to have an effect as well. So really, if it was done purely in a vacuum and in a vacuum chamber, that would mean that the relative densities, because the volumes wouldn't have any effect on the air then, it would just be the mass, and that would have been brilliant. What
would you expect to happen in a vacuum then, Anthony? Hypothesis.
I think they're all right.
If this was actually done in a vacuum, what would you expect to happen?
I think they'd all rise at the same time, give or take a couple of microseconds.
Who cares?
That's not really significant.
Okay, so you might as well.
To be honest, the Globusters show last night, in my opinion, was probably one of the best ones yet because it wasn't all everybody agreeing with each other. It was actually contentious.
Mhm.
That's how we need to be. We need to be able to call each other out on stuff
Yep.
and have proper discussion where nobody gets it too personal, even though there are elements where it might have crossed the lines at times. It's right that we call each other out in a good way because it creates conversation when we don't actually agree with each other. It's good. We should all be able to disagree.
Well, it's
There
great.
you go.
With-
I
with-
Kind of
said-
sad though that they didn't say relative
got a nice
density
super chat.
disequilibrium A causes forces equilibrium even once. That would have solved everything.
Go on, Adam.
I won't say anything.
Oh,
Can I just shout out a couple of super chats then in that case? So
Oh,
shout out to Chow Yun Cat, says not a $20 super chat, but you can think of it as one. Thank you very much indeed for the $2 super chat. And JQ also says Bob didn't prove gravity is a force, but you can think of it as Bob proving gravity is a force. George Musa 2019 paraphrase.
That's nice.
yeah, that's really good.
Thank you for the super chats. Really
That
appreciate
is
it.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just give a quick two-liner for what I saw of last night's show. Bob admitted a self-imposed standard of evidence for himself was to present arguments or present evidence that supports the assertion that there is something. Now, at the end of the day, we can all agree that there may well be something, and that goes in the category of conjecture, right? We all know that there may well be something, and I don't think anybody on the flat Earth side argues that there may be something or there may not be something else, right?
Well,
Is
Hold on.
that depends. I would
Hold
be
on.
too
Don't be so
hasty
hasty.
concluding that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
sure, but the thing is, like, we need to put this back into perspective because he did say this a couple of times throughout, and it's worth repeating. We all know it's not a sphere, right? We all know it presents itself as flat. Whether it's actually flat overall, who knows? Maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm 50-50. It could be somewhere else. I'm open-minded in that context. But what we can all agree on is that it's not a sphere the size we're told. That's absolutely agreed with everybody. We all know it's not.
Yep.
But if Bob's going to present arguments and evidence to support the assertion that there is a force, the best thing he presented last night was the gravimeter. That was his crescendo point as far as I can tell. Now, at the end of the day, his words were, he likes to take this back to science. Now, his argument is that there is a force, right? And he uses the numbers that were shown on the gravimeter to demonstrate that said force. There is another force out there that hasn't been considered by Bob. And it's not even my argument, but I'm sure Paul will agree with me that there's the possibility that the thing that the gravimeter is actually detecting is not only ethereal, but it could actually be some element of supernatural in the sense that, and I know this is spitballing, so forgive me, but I'm going to say it anyway. What other force is there that we're told of that is omnipotent, everywhere at all times, and always involved? But if we can't do anything with it, perhaps it's not actually a force, and perhaps it's actually evidence of, dare I say it, God himself. Maybe we can detect his presence, but we can't do anything with it. But to say that it's a force means that you've got to demonstrate in science that it can cause something. And if it was the case that the gravimeter could detect this force, there should be loads of experiments or actual demonstrations of cause and effect showing that whatever the gravimeter is detecting, this is what we can manipulate and prove that it's doing something. But there isn't any. There's no evidence that proves that the gravimeter proves a cause and effect relationship.
Sorry
Yeah,
to
you
interrupt.
measuring.
Just the deduction is it's the same level of proof as that. Oh, look, scales. Scales prove it. That
Sorry
it's more
to
comparable.
interrupt.
It's the same thing.
Guys, can somebody read the first 2 sentences from this wiki article about relative direction, please?
The most common relative directions are left, right, forwards, backwards, up, and down. No absolute direction corresponds to any of the relative directions. Now, Bob doesn't like that. However, there is one absolute direction that I think that is worthy of a discussion. I think there is one absolute that we could all legitimately discuss whether or not it is absolute direction, and that would be the compass north, the magnetic north. because you don't need a human to reference that. You do need a compass, but you don't need a human to be there to perceive it. It's always there. But you do need a human for all the other things. And the minute you say, I think that, you are personalizing it because that's your perspective. So when Bob said that there is a universal up and down, that's only true if you're all stood the same way. Now, he argues that, well, that allows the heliocentrism argument to exist. That's true.
I agree. That's what I was saying earlier on. There is only up. That's an absolute direction. It's not a relative direction.
Yeah, it is. What are you on about?
It's only if we're all stood the same way. But if
we are stood all the same way.
If I'm upside down, just to be awkward, it's not.
How can you stand?
Relative to us. Relative to us in our medium. So, yeah, we can assume that we're the centre of the universe, each individual or people. We're not. Up is not an absolute direction. Down is not an absolute direction.
How is that not? How?
No, we're not, but we can assume as
if you say up here, up is the same direction for every language, every person. They all look, when we say up, it's in the same direction. There's nobody who could say
relative
up and he
to
points in a
us.
different direction.
Yeah, as soon as you say when we, you tie it to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who else is there?
Okay, I'm going to start getting frustrated, so I'm going to butt out at this point. Fine, no worries. If you want to arbitrarily assign down as an absolute direction, fine. We don't need a force, flat earthers. They need a force, and they haven't got one. Now, we could just take that as a win and move on, or we can decide to invent unicorn farts. Well, on you go, invent unicorn farts, or decide that it could be a possibility that unicorn farts might be real. We can't discount that, right? Yeah, what a load of horse shit. I'm tired of it.
That's a different theory.
Yeah, we're talking
That's
about
the gas pressure related.
direction. So absolute direction. Is there an absolute up? Is there an absolute down? There's only one down and there's only one up. That's the point. There's not another. You can't go somewhere else and say this is up or this is.
But you'd have to confirm that first.
Spurs, please read the first two sentences.
Yeah, Bob dismisses this though.
Just want to hear Spurs.
Yeah, this is their understanding relativity.
Just read the sentences, Spurs. Just read them. Just read them.
Hello.
Just read them.
The most common relative directions are left, right, forwards, backwards, up and down. No absolute direction corresponds to any of the relative directions. You see, this is there. They need this for the globe. This is a globe understanding. This is relativity.
Yeah, I understand that. But that doesn't rule out a flat earth just because he doesn't like it.
No, this here, relativity has to be
not
brought
relativity.
in.
Sorry, it's just relative. It's not relativity. We're not talking about relativity. We're just saying it's relative. They're very different things.
This is not about the earth. These are about the meaning of the words.
Right. Just definitions of words. Simple. Absolutely correct, Darwin.
Directionality, not about the shape of the earth necessarily.
Right.
Nathan.
Just words and their meanings. Just semantics.
Nathan, can I present some stuff on screen that I want people to be aware of? I spent some time last night looking for supporting arguments, and I found some really, really cool non-up and down positions that I'd like everyone to just be aware of. Are we on?
Anthony, before you do, I just want to say I keep experiencing what John is trying to teach us every time, and don't take this offensively, Spurs. You fall into their begging the question argument, and you go where they want you to go, and you're discussing unicorn stuff.
So check this out, guys. Am I on, Nathan?
I think you mistake Spurs for me.
No, again, the reason why I have to stick with this because there's only one above.
Argue about it after.
And there is
argue
only
about
one.
it after. Yes, we've got you up, Sleeping Warrior, in your own time. Please don't argue over the top of what Anthony wants to show.
Spurs, I'm going to address all this at you, and I've got 3 clips. And at the end of the 3rd clip, I want you to come back to me, and I want you to tell me how you understand what's happening. They've got 2 densities of water. One's sugar solution, one's normal tap water. One's got dye in it, the other one's normal. I think the one, it doesn't matter which is which, they're relative. It doesn't matter which is which, right? He pulls up the divide and he allows it to settle. Where's the up and down at this point? And what's happening? So that's the first one. There's no up and down. I'm going to assert that there is no up and down. There is lateral displacement caused by the density disequilibrium. That's the first one. Second one, similar theme. He pulls the divide open, and again you see a mixing, right? Again, where is the up and down? Whilst this looks like just like a convection current.
That is cool.
Okay, go on.
So it looks just like a convection current, right?
Yeah.
And then the third one is this. This is fantastic. Check this one out, right? So this is done with hot and cold water, with dye in it. So again, when he pulls it out, the hot water does one thing, the cold water does something else. Right, there we go. So watch this now. This is just the same salt solution or same water solution. It's just the heat that's doing this. Cold's on the left, blue, warm's on the right. So what we can demonstrate, we all understand how convection currents work. It's doing the same thing in the real world, but with density as well. The density is acting like convection currents. Now, obviously, this is slower to work, but it's like when you're in the bath. When you're in the bath and you run the hot water, it fills up the hot part of the bath first, and then you have to swirl it around with your hands. That's the convection, right? This is demonstrating the same effect, but it's not up and down, is it? It's lateral, left and right. So we can create and show lateral.
This is as any
Very cool. Very cool.
I'd say that's totally up and down.
Yeah, it's trying to find its level though.
That whole thing is based upon.
So I'm sorry, it was you, Adam. I've got to stop you. That was directed at Spurs. At least give me a chance to bloody respond.
Yeah, come on, Spurs.
No, I mean, again, I'm seeing, like I say, it's finding its level, so it's sorting itself out, arranging, what is above and what is below. So again, it depends how you want to describe it, up or down, above, below. But there is an order where these elements know that they have to be up or they have to be down.
Listen, the question is, where is the up and down in the three that I've just demonstrated to you?
Well, you can see as it's settling. It's finding it's up or down, yeah?
Relative to you, you're looking at one and saying one is the top, one is the bottom, right? But relative to themselves, they're displacing number one sideways. And what, is the bottom the top for the top one? Well, of course not.
No, but what happens when it settles?
Who cares? Relative to you, you can arbitrarily call one top and one bottom another arbitrary assignment.
Oh, well, let Adam have a go because... like I say, I see it settling. That for me is finding its order. Yeah.
Adam?
Can I say something?
Adam's disappeared because he happened to be the person
sorry, no,
talking.
I was on mute. I didn't realise. Sorry. For me, that's ordering due to relative density, and the ordering is along the y-axis. The x-axis you're moving. Is literally just the two colliding. They have to go somewhere to force the ordering to occur. The overlap's got to occur somewhere. So you see it collapse, but what you do see is the blue collapse underneath the orange, which, because it's more dense than the natural route for it, it's not going to go above the orange. It's going to be forced due to relative density underneath because the cold blue is more dense. Well, that forcing underneath the traversement along the y-axis will always pull the denser item lower along the y-axis there. I think that's a good example. It's the left to right cascade. It shows you what happens in terms of, as the two media come together, how relative density keeps the two separate. It's quite...
Well, let me just give the two
the
positions.
One
right?
was the one that interests me because it didn't play all the way to the end, but that was really cool. But
well, let me just transpose this into the two different positions. Right, we have the first position, which is its relative density caused by the density of the liquids or the gases or whatever, and we know that we're looking at it and we're describing it with up and down. But if we weren't observing it, the unit that would be in question would be the mass over the volume. It would be the densities that's deciding the actual order. That's where the order comes from. But it's because the humans there interpreting what they see. That's where the up and down come from. But again, think about it from the non-human perspective. The language that these two things are communicating with each other or in this case, arguing with each other, is nothing to do with up and down. It's to do with I'm more dense than you, you're less dense than me. Get on top of me or get below me. But it's not a direction. It's not relative.
But hold on, it is, Anthony. Above can't be to the side, can it? And below,
more dense. When I say above, I'm saying above, but it's more dense and less dense. That's the deciding factor.
That is the up and down. Above and below is up. Above is
from
up.
The human. From the human.
You just described it. You just said one is above.
Yeah, I did. But what's really going on
What is the
there?
point to this? Why does there need to be an up and down?
It doesn't. It's the human that puts the up and down
It's
there.
just
That's why
seeking
it's relative.
equilibrium. That's all.
Look, you can point it out, up and down. That's really nice. But how is that relevant to the technical issues?
Let me answer that because there's a certain handful of people that want to assign a force to the down part of it, even though in this example, for every bit that's going down, there's an equal bit going up. So it's doing the complete polar opposite. But for some reason, we need to assign a force to the down bit. That's why we're having this conversation, Arwin. It's total and utter nonsense. We're all focused on the down bit. I'm going to take the position that you did before, Arwin. No. There's something pulling everything up. Obviously, look, we can arbitrarily define an up to it. So there must be a force pulling all the red shit up, right? No, boneheads.
The way.
Well, there is a lateralness to the relative density. That's
Quick. Let's assign a force to up then.
Can I jump in and
that's
say
why I
something?
say lateral. It's basically the z-axis. But that's it. It's not relevant to the theory because the theory doesn't require directionality. It just looks at the relative density in relation to its surroundings. That's it.
You only see lateral because it's in the container.
Yeah. And let's not forget, it's you only see laterally. It's the human that puts the relative bit to it.
Maybe it's how we're asking the question.
Or maybe some people don't actually think the same way and somehow don't want to consider the possibility.
Animals know up and down.
They don't.
You couldn't.
What on earth makes you think an animal knows up
if you
from
took
down?
an animal into so-called space or a vacuum, they would lose control. They wouldn't be able to fly, would they? They wouldn't know.
Right. Space doesn't exist.
I think all space analogies should be banned.
I
No,
agree.
I didn't know how to describe it. A place outside of the atmosphere.
Let me try and interject. I've got to interject.
Exactly.
One more
That's my
attempt.
point.
One more attempt, Spurs. Let me just have one more attempt with you. If you can shut up long enough. Spurs, let me have one more attempt. Right. In my sarcasm, I'll do it seriously rather than sarcastically. So when these two liquids are assigned top and bottom, is it reasonable in my sarcastic tone to assign an up because one of them went to the top? Is that reasonable? First question.
We have to ask, is there a direction?
I've just given it a direction, up and down. So yes, Spurs, I've said top and bottom, underneath and on top. So we've got something on top and something on underneath. Now, because they've separated in that manner, is it reasonable that I suddenly try to find the force that pulled the stuff to the top up? Is that reasonable or not?
I haven't said anything about a force. You're
just
saying
answer my question. Listen to the question. There are two separations. One of them is going, would you agree, up. Ipso facto it's the polar opposite of the stuff going down. One of them goes, according to us, an arbitrary assignment of direction. One goes down and one goes up. This is simple. Can't you just agree to that bit first of all?
Yeah, I said but
fine.
I mean, you keep saying arbitrary.
No worries. Now I'll ask my actual question that you sidestepped. Is it reasonable that because one goes up, that I look to assign a force that's pulled it there upwards?
No, I didn't say it, force, no.
Say again. What was your answer?
I'm not saying there's a force.
I'm not asking you that. What's my question? Are you assigning a force of up, or is it reasonable that I assign some force that may or may not be there that's pulling the top stuff up? Is that reasonable or not?
No.
So why is it reasonable to do the same exact thing with the stuff on the bottom for down?
I think
Answer the question.
no, because we're talking about direction here. That's all we're.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
reasonable?
Hold on, Anthony. So we've assigned up and said, look, half of it goes up. So quick, let's find the force of up. Now, according to you, not reasonable. Now, I've completely changed it to down, and equal and opposite reaction, you've got half of it going down. So is it now reasonable to say there's a down force where it wasn't reasonable to say there was an up force pulling the red stuff up?
Nah, to be fair, Nathan,
Hold
it
on,
doesn't really
Arwin.
work.
Spurs.
No, of course, no.
No. So we don't need to find a force for the down bit either.
I haven't said a force. This is what I'm saying.
I have said it as a question. Is it reasonable where it was unreasonable to assign up pulling the red stuff? Is it any more reasonable to assign a down pulling the blue stuff? Obviously, the answer is no.
No.
Right.
Course, no.
So why do we need this down force exactly?
I'm not saying again. You're asking. I'm not saying there's a force, but there is a.
As what then?
Spurs, only focus on one question. You got 5 in your head. Just answer the one question.
Yeah. Why do you have to attribute it to up and down?
Up and down doesn't mean force.
Forget force.
No shit.
Move on,
No
please.
shit. Yeah, up and down doesn't mean force. It's just an arbitrary assigned direction. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's a few people that want to assign down a force, Spurs.
No, that's what I've been saying. It doesn't mean force up and down. It just.
Why do you keep
it's just the
sidestepping it?
direction of.
So what are you saying? We should stop using the word down as a relative direction useful to reference things? Well, no. Obviously, we're talking about a force here, and you keep sidestepping it because you've got questions about other people who want to assign this force and saying, I don't assign it like I care. It's not crucial to the argument. It's not personal, Spurs.
Right. Okay, Adam. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, but hang on, Spurs, you haven't answered the question yet.
I did answer it, Anthony. I've answered everything now.
So it's not reasonable to assign down to the blue bit or up to the red bit. So therefore, no need for down forces then.
Yes, no forces. How many times am I saying this? No forces whatsoever.
Yeah, but no direction neither. The units in play are to do with the density of the, in this case, densities of the liquids, right?
Yeah, in this instance, yeah. And in this instance,
it's the same in all instances, though, Spurs. You know, if we had Earth and Earth, say the mass, say the density of the top bit was say 6, and the one underneath was say 18, and then we had Earth, but that was 2000 because iron's quite heavy. It would sit along the bottom, wouldn't it? And that's where we reside. So we're in the mixture of air, but it is a medium. It is a density medium, and there is different elements to it. It's dynamic. It's continuous. It's like imagine getting a big paddle now and paddling through that and mixing it all up. That's basically what the sun does, and a variety of other things: weather, sun, rains. There's continuous variation caused by numerous factors, so it's continuously mixing. So, and it's probably the case that sun is doing that mixing because it needs to mix so that we can breathe. Now, that doesn't mean anything more than it's just the way it is. Could be created, but the chances of that being like randomly formed, the way allowing us to breathe, is pretty remote at the best of times. But my point is that everything's dynamic and mixing up anyway, caused by the sun and the weather and all that. So we don't have this concept of, well, really, it's us that gives the concept known as up and down. Everything else is an ecosystem that we live in.
No, well, how I see it, left and right is relative. That's how you would see it, because obviously, left and right. But up and down is not relative. That's
Really?
how I see it.
Why?
But I understand the argument.
Damn it, I'm really sick of this line of thinking.
Yeah, let's move on.
Can I jump in?
Maybe do
Yeah,
your
come on,
house.
Paul. I want to hear what Paul says.
Maybe, yeah, let's move on. Do housekeeping.
I think, and what I think is happening is that's what I said. I think it's the way we're asking the question. I mean, I think our experience, we've always said up is towards the sky and down is towards the earth. So really, if you want to ask the question a different way, why do the less denser things move towards the sky or order them toward the sky? And why do the heavier things or the more dense things towards the ground? I wonder if that might be a better way to describe it, because I think that's what we're trying to say. Why does this ordering occur? But I don't think I think that's just a law. I think it's just the way it is. I don't think
we're back to that point from about 18 months
Yes.
ago.
It's completely irrelevant to relative density theory.
It is relative density. Why is it ordered in that way? Well, based on its density. That's why, Paul. So, yeah. And then how things move within those densities relevant to each medium that you might be in, depending on the layer that you're in, and depending on its density, and where it will settle in equilibrium.
Right,
so it's all relative
something
density.
And that's kind of what I was driving at.
Nathan, do you remember when me and Arwin had that very public disagreement about what was causing the order? And we had a hangout dedicated to it, just me and Arwin, where we basically went no holes barred and we battered each other, right? And it was, to some it was entertaining, but to me and Arwin it was important. This whole FE topic now is at the point that me and Arwin were about 18 months ago.
Yes,
now,
exactly.
Yeah, now we're at this
Bob
point
is doing exactly what I was doing when I was defending gravity.
Correct.
Yeah.
But what me and Arwin are now... Arwin, would you agree with me that me and you now, even though we may not agree on everything, we're a lot closer to an agreement than what we were 18 months ago when we were fighting?
Right, I totally agree.
Yes.
But I want to hear Arwin's side of that for a bit.
Right. So I would like to respond to this kind of up and down thing before, because, yeah, you can definitely explain it through gravity. You don't need to. Yeah, but I'm going to do this because I want the whole thing to be shown as it is. And gravity is very suggestible, the concept of it. So, yeah, what gravity supposedly does, if you presuppose a force disequilibrium downward, right, what it does is the heavier things displace the lighter things upward. And that is the explanation for gravity for this division. So it can definitely be explained through gravity, but it doesn't actually solve the problem with gravity, and that is that you can't prove it.
Here's something. I was actually another thought. I had another thought.
It's an aberration, and it will always be that confusing and that suggestive, because that is what it is.
But just before that gets, I will come to you next, Paul. But in Arwen's description, he says force disequilibrium. So that example starts with disequilibrium. In other words, it starts where the globe heads would start with something at the top of a vacuum chamber and then drop it, ignoring all processes that got it there in the first place to put it into disequilibrium. Typically, both of the items, the feather or the bowling ball, would be in equilibrium. They wouldn't be falling at all. We tend not to observe falling bowling balls. So that's not necessarily an equivalent that you can use practically, because we don't observe disequilibrium. Things are trying to find equilibrium all the time and typically find it. They don't suspend themselves in disequilibrium until we come along. Oh, look at that falling bowling ball.
Wow. Rumpus is actually supporting you and now saying that there isn't a
oh, let's not worry about the
boneheads.
boneheads.
Having a real weird position as of recently.
Yeah, they've got their own troubles. They've
maybe
been battered.
Rumpus is trying to embrace the aberration of it.
Yeah, just don't be taken in. Don't be taken
Rumpus thinks that George Musa supports his assertion that weight is a force, despite Musa literally saying gravity is not a force, but you can think of it as a force. Somehow Rumpus twists that by looking at other parts where he does kind of lean one way and completely ignores the bit where he then backflips and the opposite way and basically contradicts himself. So if Rumpus is agreeing with you, you know you're wrong.
Yeah, but ultimately speaking, you can side with only half of the doublespeak. That's why it's doublespeak. When any particular aspect is useful for one side of the doublespeak, that's the side that Rumpus will choose. It's no worries. In that regard, to Arwin, this is, when you've got the Globers who are currently in a bit of a disarray over this, yeah, saying, it is, we can attribute it a force, we can use it as a force, etc., etc., you just quote George Musa. It's just that simple now. So this isn't a globehead issue anymore. You know, I'm not keen to get Globers on the panel to discuss this. They've been battered. all kudos to Anthony. But this is about the flat earthers that are left on the tail end of it going, well, we've been so brainwashed to believe there's a downward force that we must automatically assume disequilibrium and then start figuring out why stuff goes down when it's more dense in the air that it's suspended or the vacuum it's suspended when you've taken it out of equilibrium to begin with.
Let me address SX0 in chat. He's done
Can I jump in?
Go on.
I never got my thought out.
Yeah, Paul.
Because I've been thinking about this. Obviously, I sat back and try to listen and try to figure out myself. And the more I look at it, the more I not evaluate it. I think they're trying to contribute something that's a very complex system. Obviously, we talked about this briefly. And I think all we see going on is chemical and mechanical processes occurring. And we're trying to attribute something to that, all those processes occurring that shouldn't be attributed. You know, like there's either a chemical process occurring through heat transfer or a reaction between two molecules or whatever, or something like even Erwin was saying is like other molecules pushing on another molecule to push it either into its equilibrium state. So we're trying to attribute something that's just a complex system interacting with everything else. You know, it's that entropy. You know, I was just thinking about even like I mixed up tea this morning or yesterday, some iced tea, and I saw the entropy occurring right there in my tea mixture. You know, and even how we need that process to cause tea to be made. We need that entropy to occur so that the tea can spread throughout the water. You know, I don't know. It's just I think we're making it too. We're trying to make it too simple. And it's a complex system that you can't just bear down to one specific thing is ultimately my point.
Let me have a go with the hammer point. SX0 said, can you guys address the example Bob gave yesterday in space? If he's referring to the hammer, and Bob said when you get into the middle of space and you're not within any gravitational pulls or whatever, and you let go of the hammer, what direction does it go? And Jaron's like, well, you're assuming that space is a real thing, right? And he's like, yeah, but just go with me for the sake of this. And obviously Jaron's going to say, well, it's going to float in it. It's not going to go in any direction. Well, we all realize that whatever space may or may not be, it's not what we're being told. We need to remind ourselves of when that density layer is getting less and less and less, your relative state, your relative mass in the medium that you're in is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And we know that because when Fight the Flat Earth said if it was all down to relative density, would slow down as they get into towards the more dense medium. Well, they would speed up as you get towards the less dense medium as well if you were in a state of free fall, but you're not. You're having to push yourself through with a rocket. So as you're pushing yourself through, there's less and less air for your rocket to push off. And you're getting heavier and heavier and heavier because the medium around you is getting less and less and less. That's why rockets all seem to go up and then come straight back down. They're not going into an orbit. They're coming straight back down because there's nothing up there to sustain the weight that you're in, unless they can prove that space is actually real. So with regards to the hammer question, my answer would have been it'll always displace the vacuum that you're in that they tell us is space, and it'll always fall back towards Earth because, like he said right at the start, with the relative directions, that allows heliocentrism to exist but we're not living on a ball. Well, I can flip that around the other way and say, well, we're not living on a ball, so you can't have space either. So if the hammer gets dropped, it's just going to fall straight back down to Earth at like 600, 700, 800 miles an hour. And then it'll do what Felix did. It'll start to slow down as it hits the thicker air. So the idea that it'll float is the sci-fi, it's science fiction. We all know that space is not what we're being told. Why should we beg the question and assume that it is like that just so that Bob can get a victory based in Narnia?
I'm going to do a couple of shout-outs to Super Chatters. Thank you very much to Ranty Flat Earth, who's on the panel. Dropity, but you can think of it as gravity. I'll try to read that again. Dropity, but you can think of it as gravity. Thank you very much, Ranty. SX0, that's the message you were just reading out, right, Anthony?
Yeah.
Right. Rubix, well, thank you very much, SX0, for the Super Chat. Really appreciate your support. And Rubix says, Rumpus is not human, but you can think... ...
Why are we taking 3 steps backwards after?
I wanted to. I'm sorry.
Why are we taking 3 steps backwards after a great win by George Musser? How in the world are we even caught into these arguments of vacuums and space and gravity and gravimeter versus the ring laser gyro crap? We live in a pressurized system. If you want to prove all the stuff, take real human beings, go into that NASA building with 8-foot walls and do it, and let's see if someone doesn't cook.
We're addressing it because there's lots of people who think there's a downward force, and Arwin...
There's not.
I appreciate... I'm going to do a Spurs on you now. There isn't, and Arwin appreciates that now. It's taken him a fair amount of time to be able to concisely summarise what he just did. More power to him. You know, it's been a battle to get there. But that's a useful tool. You know, why are we here? Why are the people with that belief? Well, let's just focus that energy on the globehead people that are far worse position than the people who think there's a downward force. Let's be honest.
Right. But hold on though, Nathan. It's not over yet, and that's also part of that conclusion of the aberration, because there may be some weird, unexpected off chance
here we go.
Gravity might be manipulatable after all. We figure it out.
I'm not too concerned that people
currently we
unicorns.
definitely cannot prove it.
Yeah, you can't. That's an argument from ignorance fallacy. You can't disprove unicorns.
Right, but we might be able to find unicorn skeletons.
We might discover unicorn
It might change everything.
Yeah, we might. There's a million mights. Anything's possible. Blah, blah, blah. Couldn't care less.
Well, with technology, potentially, there may be something achieved that will clarify what is causing this division, this lateral division within the relative density.
Well, you've just answered your own
what,
question.
What I'm saying.
Relative density, you answered it within your own
Yeah,
statement.
I know. Relative density does it. That is the actual cause-driven thing. But what causes the lateral division in the first place?
Well, it's like trying to find the answer to the
what
second...
causes relative density, basically?
Yeah, it's like trying to find
that?
the answer to the second law of thermodynamics. What causes entropy? Well, you're never going to find the answer to a natural law. And as far as I'm concerned, this should be considered it once it's explainable in maybe one paragraph, rather than a 3-year argument about a downward force, assigning relative directions arbitrary forces. Well,
right.
Yeah, that's the bit I'm tired of. Like, you're tired about arguing it from the position of relinquishing the downward force and describing now force disequilibrium, which you're entitled to do, you know, but unless there's someone like me saying, well, we don't start with things in disequilibrium generally, we start with things in equilibrium. Everything's sought its equilibrium, and then it's there when you come to it. You know, and if it's not, there's normally a reason or a process behind why it isn't. You know, a tree growing? But we have these arguments still. It's necessary, so I should really calm down, take a breath, and say, no, there's enough people out there that have still got this magical unicorn farts, gravity force, stuck in their head. And even though we don't need it, even though it's not necessary to our narrative, people still want to believe in a dropity or downward force. And, well, fine, you know, we'll just keep saying it's relative to the medium, it's separated in terms of its medium and its density. You know, we can just say the same things over and over again, and when people say, well, no, down is a definite direction, look, there's the ground. Well, yeah, you're looking and assigning a vector from your position and then saying it's down. Well, no, those separations have been dictated by the density of the medium you're looking at. You know, the ground is more dense. It's like if you want to say, I'd stand at the top of a cliff and drop something and it has this certain velocity downwards, and then I say, oh, well, I've just done the same thing, and it didn't. It stayed in exactly the same position. Why is that? And they go, well, that makes no sense. Of course it went down. Well, no, my cliff was at the top of a different medium. It was at the top of water, and it didn't. It just suspended itself on the top of it because the medium was far more dense. But nice. I'm still at the top of a cliff. It's just medium specific, right? You know, same with the beach ball example. You know, you've got a beach ball on the edge of a beach. Nothing's happening. Might be a bit of wind blowing it around a little bit, but that's obviously attributable to the wind. But when it all dies down, it's just in equilibrium. It settles where it is. Now, you can do one of two things. You can try and put a bit of energy into forcing it into the water medium, down, when we assign a direction to it, and then it'll go in the opposite direction when you release it, having ignored all the processes to get it down in the first place. And the same applies if you use a bit of energy to take it up. So it makes so odds. It's just dependent on the medium and the density of whatever it is you're looking at, and how you arbitrarily assign a word to what it does, up or down in this instance. But there's always going to be an opposing thing that happens. There's always going to be an opposite reaction. Now, in their narrative, the ballers, they say, well, that's the buoyant force. You're having everything pulled down, therefore the opposite reaction is as a byproduct of the gravity force. Horseshit. Everything's just finding equilibrium. You know, if you're forcing something out of the way, it's going to go up. But you don't start finding the force of up. There's no necessity to do so.
Let me just address Bob while I can see him in chat. Bob, right at the beginning of Globebusters, one of the first segments that they dealt with was my video that was basically said, it was described or titled something like to the ignorant flat earthers or something like that. Let me just put the context to that. I had a massive disagreement with Nora, and Nora does believe that there is some relative or some universal up and down vehemently. But when it comes to the proof in the pudding, she hasn't got any proof in the pudding. She just believes it. And a reinforcement is the fact that Aristotle, the fantastic philosopher that he was, in some way inspires her because she studied him while she was younger in an earlier life. That's her justification for why she thinks that there is a relative up and down, an absolute up and down. The video was originally aimed at Nora because I do consider Nora, without any evidence to support her assertions, to be pushing nonsense. Because when I challenged her on what nonsense she was pushing, she didn't have any evidence to support it other than Aristotle, who was a philosopher. Now, let's be clear. A philosopher is not somebody that's based on empiricism. That's science. So a philosopher is somebody that daydreams and wonders what the stars might be. Now, as credible as that may be to some, it's not to me. So when I was saying that this is an ignorant flat earther position, it was actually aimed at Nora, because she's influenced Mark Doxey and had an influence on him to believe that Mark Doxey can feel gravity. Nobody can feel gravity. If the gravimeters are measuring gravity, there's no way Mark Doxey can feel gravity, but he now thinks that he can because Nora's told him that there is. And that's why I was aiming it, because at the end of the day, if you think that there is an absolute up and down and you've got nothing to support it other than conjecture, other than philosophy, that is not a strong position and you should not be pushing it as truth. Bob's thought I was aiming that at him, and he thinks that I was targeting him personally. I wasn't. But I will say this to you, Bob. If you are going to push that same narrative, you better have some evidence to prove it. Now, you have presented some evidence, and by your own admission, that was your task to try and present arguments and present evidence to support your assertion that there is an absolute up and down. Whether or not you did that is open to the jury. In other words, the watchers, the listeners. We make the decision. And you can interpret the results any way you wish. But what I will suggest to you is that there may actually be an absolute direction that we could all legitimately agree with. We do have compasses, and there does seem to be a magnetic north. All the compasses line up to it. That would be an absolute direction because you don't need the human for that to exist. That could be an absolute direction at like magnetic north. Now, it's moot. There could be, might not be. People may say, nah, it's not because blah, blah, blah. But my point is, up and down, it's only there because of the humans. If you're going to argue it, you better have some evidence for it. Nora didn't, but she influences people, and I don't agree with that. She should accept and admit that it's spitballing, and it might not actually be true. But she doesn't. She pushes it. And unfortunately, if you're going to push that too, you've got to have something to support it, because otherwise it should be categorized as spitballing. Zach said in chat
the atmosphere, Anthony.
Just last sentence. Right. Zach said in chat just then that up and down is defined by the flow of electricity in the atmosphere. That may well be true, and I'm not disagreeing. I'm not agreeing. I accept that point, and we can all accept that possibility. But it is in the realms of, well, this is not what we're being told by science. What we're being told by science, we can question. So that goes into spitballing. And yeah, I can accept that it could exist. But the point is, gravity, this thing, is relying on this up and down perception that we give to it to exist. Let's not forget the importance of what happened with George Musa. Musa wasn't mentioned last night. I'm surprised. It should have well come up because it was such a killer thing. But this is let's not distract from the fantasticness that George Musa gave us. Gravity is not a force, but you can think of it as a force. Well, whilst we're on this tangent, let's not forget that bigger picture, because whether gravity exists or not, whether there's a universal up and down or not, there's definitely not the force of gravity. And really, that's what we should be ramming home, because we all know that that's nonsense. And then Musa back and forth and contradicting himself, and Rumpus then picking the bits that supports his argument. We're laughing at these ballers. So whilst we're having this off-topic moot conversation about whether or not there might be, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here. Gravity is nonsense, and we all know it. Let's not lose sight of that, because that's a really cool point for us. I'm done.
I actually think it's very encouraging that they're finally figuring out that gravity is an aberration, and they're slowly getting there. By first figuring out that it's not a force, even though it definitely looks like it is, and you can treat it as if it is.
Well, yeah, that's why they're all saying that. That's why they're all saying it manifests as one now, right? they're all trying to kind of circle back. Oh, it's not really a force, but it manifests itself as one, right? Yeah. You know, real quick, I want to give a shout out to Jaron because what he said yesterday, and he said it before, it's real simple to me, and it just makes sense. You know, if you've got a golf ball and it's just in the air, you know, obviously the golf ball is heavier than the air, right? More dense than the air. It's going to go in a direction, right? Whatever direction that is, that's where everything else is going to go. That's more dense than the air, right? Now, wherever that direction is, it's going to go. All the objects are going to go. We are going to go. That's where we're all going to be. And as humans, we're just going to call that down, right? But that's us calling it down. I get that. You know, I don't see why it has to be this big to do with, you know, is up and down absolute. Now I get that on a flat earth, you know, we look up, we look down as humans, that's what we call it. But yeah, everything has a direction it's going to go into. What we name it, I think, is arbitrary. I don't see why it has to be any more than it is.
And with that, I'm going to say, if you're watching this on the Nathan Oakley premiering stream, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you're watching this live on Nathan Oakley 1980, this is where we bid you farewell. A massive, huge, enormous thank you to all of you who smashed the super chat, joined us live, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, and all that good stuff. Of course, a massive thank you to all of today's debating panel for making this debate possible. I've been Nathan Oakley. Be sure to check out the Flat Earth Debate Forum at nathanoakley.com, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!